There are women who want to be married and have children and still have a career.
Yep.
There are women who want to be stay at home mothers that still want to be prominent members in the community. There are women that want nothing more than to stay at home. The same way that every man's purpose is different, every woman's purpose is different. And to put out a blanket statement like women are a monolith, I think is what creates that deep set unhappiness. Yes, there is the chemical stuff. Yes,
Mhm.
there is postpartum. Yes, there is depression. Yes, there is mental health issues. Yes, there are traumatic experiences. Absolutely, those are contributing factors. But when you take those things away in a supportive partnership, really it's unfulfillment, right? And going back to what I was saying earlier, sacrifice is not a bad word. I don't think that any relationship can work without sacrifice. But sacrificing your happiness, I think, is something that, like, how do you really set that example to seek fulfillment and happiness for your children if you have sacrificed that? If you can't model that behavior for them, and yes, it is a fleeting feeling. I agree. It is fleeting. But to live a life with no happiness, to say that that's something I'm willing to put aside until they are grown adults, or to say that this is something that I'm just willing to come to terms with that I will never be able to have within this relationship, what is that really modeling? What example are you showing? Because we talk about showing all the time, not just in words, but also in action. What are you showing the next generation to say happiness is something that's on the table for sacrifice, even though it is a fleeting feeling? I'm not advocating for happiness to be at the very top, that we have to prioritize our happiness at all times. That's not what I'm saying at all, but it has to have some amount of factor in a relationship. If you can never be happy in a relationship, what does that show? If you have a daughter, that's setting her up for a similar dynamic. If you have a son, that's setting up that expectation that the woman that he chooses should be willing to sacrifice that.
But
And I
see,
think that's
But you know what?
you're not being happy has to do if you're
no, no,
unhappy.
no, but not.
But
I'm
look,
not.
I have a
But
question.
again, I'm not taking it to the extreme where happiness has to be the most important. That's not what I'm saying. And I think
Mhm.
that's where this miscommunication is coming from. I'm
Yeah.
saying if it's happiness is never on the table for the woman, what example is that setting?
No,
Because that's
that's
what
what I'm saying.
sacrifice
If
means.
you're unhappy, then I don't think that that's necessarily the relationship. I think that's self work that you need to do to figure out how to make yourself happy. Because that's another problem. We go into relationships with the expectation that is our partner's responsibility to keep us happy.
No,
It
that's
is
not what I'm
not.
saying either.
You're
That's
setting them up for failure because nobody can maintain that level of responsibility to keep you happy.
No, that's not what I'm saying either. Right? I'm not saying that your partner has to take on whether you are happy or not. That's not
Okay.
what I'm saying. All I am saying is we were talking, the question was, should women be sacrificing their happiness in a relationship or a marriage, right? Because
Mhm.
we've been leaning heavy towards marriage. Should a woman be sacrificing her happiness? That also means her willingly doing that. Not that her partner is setting that expectation for her, but that she's understood through teaching, through society, through whatever, that that's something that she should be putting on the table, is giving up her happiness. And
Mhm.
if a woman makes that decision, whether somebody's expecting it of her or she's making it on her own,
Mhm.
what example is that setting for the next generation, that happiness can be taken off of the table altogether? That's the only thing that I'm saying, that it should not be top priority, but it should not be taken off the table either. It needs to have its appropriate place on the table.
I don't know. I feel like there's a small dance around because I'm not fully understanding what happiness means now because you said fulfillment, which is, fine, but you find fulfillment in the things that you love to do. For me, it's music, learning languages. I find my fulfillment in those things. My husband and I became happy before we even met each other, and coming together, we love each other. We do many things together. We spend time together. We communicate. But happiness comes from outside of the relationship, and coming together to sacrifice something for a greater good is a whole separate thing. So I do think we're conflating this topic, or maybe I'm misunderstanding.
You know what? Maybe it's because you found happy, like you're with the partner you're supposed to be with, mistaking you're with the partner you're supposed to be with. Maybe that's just something we haven't experienced because we're not with that partner.
No,
We're
it's,
supposed to be,
and that could be it
partner we're
too.
supposed to be married to. So maybe you're speaking a foreign language to us because we're not in that partnership with a man we see happily ever after with, and we just can live vicariously through you, like, oh, he exists.
And that could be the case too. But years before meeting my husband, I done traveled the world. I've done all of these wonderful things, and we came to a point where I'm like, God, I am so good. You know, when you do send my husband, it's gonna be great. I got to that point, and then he came. So it was such a different experience for me. So maybe you're right, I am speaking from that. But before I even met him, I was fulfilled, and I am fulfilled. And God's willing, when we have children, it's gonna be even better. So I don't know.
I think the question more so is for women who are in relationships and that the husband is just really not being a good partner anymore. Or maybe you look at Miss Tate, you're married and you go out on a double date with Miss Taken and her husband, and you see how much they just love each other. You see how much he adores his wife, protects his wife, and then you looking over at your husband like, he don't do none of that. I don't feel that way. I don't feel no white. I don't feel, it's been years and I can't stand him. And I don't even sleep in the same bed. It's people who don't even sleep in the same bed together.
And I think that's part of the problem right there too. Is sometimes we get caught up in comparing our relationship to others because you will always
but mistaken it's some telltale signs. I've seen good marriages and I've seen bad ones. Look,
you will always see, even to this day, as much as I love my husband. I remember me and my sisters, every year we go on like a sister outing. And, you know, that's the time that we basically talk about our husbands sometimes, right? So what it is that we all know that we have the right husband for us, because when we looked at each other's husband, we're like, man, I can't deal with that. I couldn't put up with that. Oh, Lord, no, not me. But then there were other aspects to each other's husbands that we say, you know what? I really like this about my brother-in-law. He does X, Y, and Z. My husband don't do that. But if I got caught up in all of the things that my husband didn't do, which there was a period of time that I went through that, where I'm like, Dad, he don't do this, he don't do that. That when I got caught in that mindset, right, I began to focus so much on the things that in every little thing that, man, gosh, he don't pick up his socks. Gosh, how come every time he, you know, does the dishes, he never rinse it and put it in the dishwasher? Oh my, like everything got on my nerve and I was just focusing on the negative, right? But then after we had one of our girl trip and I was trying to fuss about those things, they were like, well, damn, you should be happy that your husband even does he sweeps, he does the dishes. Oh, he helps with laundry. My husband don't do any of that. And so I had to kind of step back because I thought this was just the norm. And I found out that it wasn't. And so once I began to change my mindset on how much he does add to the relationship, where for me, it was an expectation, but I didn't realize so many other people didn't have that once I began to shift my thinking, I began to see so many other things that he does. So I think a lot of times we begin to compare our partners to other people based on the things that they're lacking. So and we don't do the other thing by appreciating them for the things that the value and the things that they do and add to the relationship.
So again, I think that you're speaking from a healthy relationship, but I've seen unhealthy relationships where they're not talking to each other, ain't no sex involved. They ain't got nothing in common. Matter of fact, he got another chick over there that he talks to. I think that when you're talking about petty situations like the grass, some of these my chat said the grass not being cut. Oh, he left the toilet seat. That to me is so petty. But when you're talking about bigger things, like you guys don't even say anything to each other when you walk in the room, it's an awkward silence.
But it gets to that point from those small things.
Well,
It can.
Build and build and build.
Yeah, you talking to every night at 11 o'clock. But
that too.
But okay, so because I want to jump in here because Chanel, you said something really important. The research actually shows that it's the other way around. The research actually shows that those big comparisons are what turn into that small nitpicky stuff because you're not able to vocalize the big stuff. The communication is broken down. You no longer feel safe to dialogue or find solutions about the big stuff, the heavy stuff, the values, the important things, the way that you fundamentally function in a relationship. That typically, and again, like for you and Mistaken and what you've talked about in your relationships, they seem like really healthy dynamics, but typically the conversations around he doesn't pick up his dirty laundry, leaves them on the floor, is really rooted in, hey, you don't ever really appreciate me. You don't appreciate my contributions to the relationship.
And that was what the argument was really about.
Healthy dynamic. But in most relationships, the communication is broken down to the point where we can only discuss the small things because that's where that level of tolerance for conversation comes from. We can't even get to the big stuff anymore because that's how much communication is broken down. I love that y'all are out here really living that life and like the example of what healthy relationships look like, but that's not the norm. Y'all are really the exception.
I feel like we are the norm and everybody else is not the.
Well, we are the norm in the fact that we got shit that we deal with. Like there are times we don't like each other.
But again, 100%. But to what Shan Monet is saying, to what Shan Monet is saying, like it's no. Listen, if our siblings or our parents or people that we love, our blood, like we would give our lives for them. We have those nitpicky conversations. Our spouses are really no exception to that rule. Having those nitpicky things we don't like about them, things that are annoying, 100%. That's just normal human interaction. I'm talking about the fact that when we're looking at relationships that people go through, how many of them they go through, when we're looking at divorce rates, at people who've been married multiple times, when we look at the statistics about what your average person's experience is when it comes to relationships, either leading up to marriage or getting into marriage, what y'all have is not the norm. It's not. And I love that it's not for you. No, but the reality is most people don't like each other. That we're not even, and the nitpicky stuff is just surface level where we don't feel safe enough to have the conversation that we don't like each other.